I was reading the story of a rabbi I greatly respect, actually an Orthodox rabbi, and he said that the day he started yeshiva in New York City, he was eating at a kosher restaurant on the Upper West Side, and he was sitting there with a text of the Talmud, and there was one other old guy with the long beard and the black coat, and he said, "So what are you doing over there?" And he said, "Well, I'm reading the Talmud." And the old man said, I don't even believe in God. And the kid didn't know how to handle it. The old man came and sat down at his table and engaged him in conversation. This young man, who was a future great rabbi, said he was stymied so much of the time he didn't know how to talk to a man who didn't believe in God. The next day when he started rabbinical school, when he started yeshiva, he realized that man was one of the heads of the faculty and was his teacher. Not entirely dissimilar, at the first dinner when I started rabbinical school, we met at the board's home, and we're one of the members of the board, and we're all gathered around, all the rabbinical students are there, and everyone's nervous they're going to make a mistake. I was certain they were going to ask me to make a blessing over a pineapple or something, and I wouldn't have the right one. But no one was talking, and it was deuced awkward. So I finally started a conversation. I figured I'd kick it around a little bit. And I said, one of the things I love about the Shema is that we only have one line of creed in our religion. And I mean, you can think God is anything you want if when you say the Shema, and you're still a Jew, you're still included. And at that point, Rabbi Artson turned to me, the head of the yeshiva, in front of everyone and said, "So why do you have to believe in God to say the Shema and be a good Jew?" And I was stymied. I was like, because it says God, and I don't know what to say. I think that both teachers were trying to teach a very serious point, which is that it's the nature of Jews to disagree and to talk for a higher purpose. Some of you know that, and I've mentioned it, the Talmud is based on the idea of debate and disagreement. It's maybe the greatest, one of the 2 or 3 greatest gifts of the Jews. That when we learn to read texts, and this is what we're trying to do in our Hebrew school, when we learn to read texts in different ways, and to get meanings where other people just see a simple surface meaning, and then they're a fundamentalist, and they believe, and they're good with it, and we're like, as the Hasidim used to say, one of the great sayings, anyone who can read the Torah and not be troubled by it, and bothered, the worst thief is better than such a person, because you're stealing from the Torah to read the surface and be a fundamentalist. So our very tradition, we're teaching our Hebrew schools, when you can read a text and see it 100 different ways, then you learn to read nature, and you see beneath it 100 different things going on, and you become a great scientist. And you learn to read people, and you see 100 different things going on in the people that you love, and then you learn better how to do what we're doing today, how to do tshuva, how to be better, how to grow, how to heal, and how to be as good as you can be in this world where it's impossible to be perfect. The rabbi said this, though. For public debate, the only people allowed to debate among the Talmudic academies, they had their own schools. Hillel had a school, Shammai had a school, Rabbi Meir had a school, Rabbi Yossi had a school. They all had their little academies. In order to debate publicly, for example, in the Sanhedrin, you had to be a principal. You had to be one of the heads of the academies, and students were not allowed to debate publicly. You have to ask yourself, why would the rabbis make this rule that the students in the schools could not debate publicly? And the reason was simple. I said the point of all of this debating is to make us stronger. But students don't understand what it means to argue for the sake of heaven, for the sake of God. And to argue, just have one person say, I don't believe in God, another person say, believe in God, is that going to be hostile and separating? Or is that going to be a discussion that brings 2 Jews together? And there's a wonderful Leonard Cohen poem I love, where he says, there's an end of the poem, and he says, we're 2 Jews sitting at a table in a diner. Are we going to have a sandwich, or are we going to get into a good argument? Now let's 2 Jews get down to business. Great poem. So the question is, the 2 Jews who get down to business understand they're on the same team, and they're debating for the same thing, And even if one person says, I'm an atheist and I'm a better Jew than you because I help the poor and you just stay in shul and pray, and the other person says, no, at the end they know they're together. The students, they felt, did not know that. Students, they felt, it's like, I don't know, college football teams today or something. It's like, you guys are the worst over there, we're going to get you. So that they had this idea that the students would be so competitive that they would say, oh my God, how can you eat a piece of swordfish? How can you consider a way, to actually be kosher? Yeah, on a technicality, what's wrong with you? And that if whatever they debated, whether it was whether the Messiah is going to come and what the meaning of Messiah is, or what's kosher, or how you keep Shabbos, that they'd be like, how can you call yourself a Jew? And take that attitude. That's the way they felt the students would act. We're in tremendous need of unity today as Jews. At the end of, Midrash Tanchuma on Nitzavim, on the end of Deuteronomy, the commentary on that, the rabbis said that we have to be like reeds that are put together in a bundle. A single reed taken on its own can easily be broken, but a reed bundled together is strong as iron. Reeds bundled together. And so, and I know I'm going to make people unhappy just by bringing up this word. How do we find a way to be unified on the topic and discussions of the future of the state of Israel? I have faith that Israel is going to live and thrive. But I'm religious. That's easy for me. I mean, I see the Israel being born out of the ashes in 1948, really before. I see its miraculous survival under onslaught. I know that God is going to save Israel. But I also know that there are worthy discussions about Israel's future. I was distressed last year when I was approached about a rally against a rally here in San Diego that the United States government's not doing enough about Iran and the possibility of Iran being bombed, that we should bomb them. After all, Prime Minister Netanyahu said clearly that this is what needs to be done, and if the United States won't do it, then Israel must do it. They're going to have a nuclear weapon in no time, and why is America waiting? So I said, I endorse the rally. I want you to put Ner Tamid's name on it, and I'm going to advertise it. But then someone said to me, well, why aren't you up there on the days and saying, hey everybody, I'm Rabbi Kane and we got to do this? I said, because I'm not so sure. Seems to me that you got this guy, Ahmadinejad. He's incredibly unpopular. All the polls are saying he's going to lose the next election. And it seems to me that every time the polls go down, his rhetoric gets more extreme about Israel and denying the Holocaust and saying outlandish things. Seems to me that maybe what's going to happen is he's trying to win an election by getting... What would happen if America or Israel attacked him? He'd be the most wildly popular person in Iran. Because he'd be popular because the evil Westerners and the Jews have bombed him, and he can even declare martial law and say it's a time of war. So I'm going to declare myself dictator. It's happened before in Iran. And so I was like, I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure it's the right thing to do. I feel like there may be another position on this, but no, there was no other position on it. Eventually a movie came out, The Gatekeepers, where members of Israel's security services said just that. They said that Netanyahu was very concerned about raising money and polls, and he felt that bombing Iran would be a good way to consolidate power. But I'm still not sure I'm right, because Ahmadinejad was thrown out of power. That's true. And the sanctions that the United States and others had levied seem to be working. And right now the United States is trying, although AIPAC and the Israel lobbies have tried very hard to undermine that effort, to make deals with Iran for them to pull back on their nuclear development in exchange for lighter sanctions. But I could be wrong that that's actually the way to go. And it could be that those who say on the other side that we're playing exactly into Iran's hands. And that by coddling them and letting them play this game where they're going to dial back on their nuclear aspirations, that they are fooling us. To me, this is two Jews arguing instead of ordering a sandwich. I know I could be wrong, even though I took the first approach, like the Shin Bet security guys. I feel like maybe that I have the humility to know that I may well be wrong. Other things have gone on in the Edward Snowden files. He declassified hundreds of thousands of files from National Security Agency in America. One of the things that he declassified was that the NSA in America gives to Israel all the emails and phone conversations. I don't mean like who they called, I mean the actual conversations made by Arab Americans and Palestinian Americans in this country, and anyone who might have a connection to Gaza or the West Bank. And we just give this information to the Israel Security Services, to Unit 8200. It's a special unit in the Israeli Security Services. What they do with that information is that they do what is necessary for our ability to even know what we're firing at in Gaza and who we're even fighting in the West Bank. Have you often wondered, as have I, how do they know these people? I mean, the Hamas fighters and their leaders, they're cowards. They're either living outside of the country or they're hiding behind women and children. How do you know what to do? Turns out that it depends greatly on intelligence. Unit 8200 uses information about the sexual orientation of Arab Americans, about infidelities that are uncovered in their emails and phone calls, about financial problems, about their family medical conditions, and they use that information to approach them to force them to become collaborators with the Israeli military services. This year, 43 veterans of Unit 8200, Israeli veterans, went public with a letter in the Israeli papers exposing this, because it had already been exposed by Snowden, and saying that they thought it was wrong. I don't know. Do you? On the one hand, how are we supposed to get at the Hamas fighters? On the other hand, bribing people to make public that they're gay or that they're cheating on a spouse, to force them to put their lives at risk, to become collaborators for Israeli security services, is that the way to get information? It reminded me of, in one of the other Gaza invasions, the Hamas was using ambulances to transport Hamas fighters and arms, because they knew that under Red Cross rules, and whatever you call it, international law, whatever that is, these international laws that someone writes, that you're not allowed to shoot at ambulances. So they made primary use of these things for their tactics. So the IDF targeted them. Sounds right to me. Well, Doctors Without Borders took them to court under international laws of violating human rights. And the court essentially ruled against the IDF, saying that while the IDF is fully, in a sense, justified, you could say, on the other hand, they must do everything they can to prevent this happening in the first place, and they really have to do whatever they can to let ambulances through, even at a cost. Sounds like one of those awful international courts of human rights that just loves to focus on Israel instead of all of these other countries I already mentioned, let alone Gaza and the West Bank, which is the source of some of the worst human rights violations in the world. Actually, it was the Israeli Supreme Court. They were the ones that ruled essentially against the IDF. They released a statement saying they're not so fond necessarily of international humanitarian law, but as Jews, we live up to the standard of not firing on ambulances. I actually don't know if the Israeli Supreme Court was right in that decision. I think it's worthy of a debate. I think it's a debate that has to be had. I don't think either side are evil, and I don't think either side are disqualified from being Jews. AIPAC held a meeting last year. I don't know if you know this, but when AIPAC, our lobby in Washington, they actually claim correctly that when they hold meetings of members of Congress, they get more people to show up than anything short of a State of the Union address or a joint session of Congress. So they had a number of senators there at a conference. Tim Kaine, senator from Virginia, asked a question. He asked whether Israel is, in a sense, moving just toward a one-state solution, which is a legitimate thing to ask, which is, is this sort of the plan for the future that, you know, there isn't going to be a Palestinian state anywhere, but they're going to figure out a way to somehow, you know, basically stay in the territories or take them back over. Is there a plan toward that? Charles Schumer, whom I love Chuck Schumer, right? He reminds me of my uncles, somewhere between one of my Kane uncles and a Yenta, but he's a great guy. So Chuck Schumer, Democrat of course from New York, he interrupted and he said, I object that the senator from Virginia is repeating Hamas propaganda. Senator Kaine immediately apologized. In fact, to do penance to AIPAC, he came in while Congress was out of session to be one of 5 senators to make possible a vote to provide funding for Iron Dome months before the funding was supposed to go to Israel for the Israeli missile system. I'm glad Israel got the money for Iron Dome a couple of months early. But I'm not sure Tim Kaine was repeating Hamas propaganda. After all, you and I probably know, this is nothing new. You don't need to take courses and courses in graduate level Jewish Israeli historiography. That we're in a dilemma in the state of Israel, and we wish someone, I mean, my father used to just tell stories on High Holy Days about the whole thing about everything doesn't make sense because it's the Mideast and give up. So I'm going to try to avoid that, even though that may be the best message, and say this. How do you solve the paradox? There are 3 things we're aiming for. We want a Jewish state. We want a democratic state. And if you're like me, I kind of want the larger land. I mean, Gaza they can have. Everyone wants to get rid of Gaza. But like the West Bank is kind of nice, and we have a lot of settlements there, and it seems like it would be a good idea to have. So we kind of have a choice. Here's the way the paradox works. You can have 2 of the 3. You can have a Jewish state and a democratic state, but give that land over to a Palestinian state. You can have the land, and you can have a Jewish state. But then all the people in those territories remain non-citizens. And unlike Israeli Arabs of the past, won't be serving in the military, won't be part of the Jewish state. Or you can have the land, and you can have a democracy. But then you don't necessarily have a Jewish state, because there are a couple of million Arabs living over there. And if we're going to keep those territories, and we're going to let them vote, and let them serve in the army, then Israel will become a modern democratic state. But it will no longer be a Jewish state. Now, you've probably heard this before. You're like, oh my God, the rabbi's repeating all this stuff. We've heard this stuff for 25 years. I get emails like that. It's still the antinomy that hasn't been solved. You can have 2 of the 3, and I think what Tim Kaine makes a lot of sense. I think where we're kind of going, it seems to be, no one's talking. It's funny, a couple of people send me these emails that Obama doesn't have a plan. He doesn't have a plan. Can you imagine a president without a plan? I have no idea what Benjamin Netanyahu's plan is. I know he's a good man. I know he cares about the state of Israel. I know he's doing his best. But I have no idea what the plan is for solving this problem. As far as I can tell, we build settlements in the territories and eventually we'll absorb them. I don't know what that means in terms of what we're going to give up. Are we going to give up a democratic state? And so we'll just have a lot of people who have some kind of ethnic autonomy, sort of like they get to choose how the dog catcher is and who's going to pick up the trash. But otherwise they're not really citizens. Or are we going to have some kind of one-state solution where we have a modern democratic state, and if the Jews are in the minority, they're in the minority? I'm not really sure. I got to tell you the truth. You may think that you know what I think, but I honestly don't know which of the three options we should do. I know I, like you, have the fantasies. I would love to pick up the Palestinians and dump them somewhere else. Unfortunately, they picked up themselves and tried to take over Jordan, and King of Jordan beat back, and of course they did take over Lebanon, and then they kind of got beaten back mostly, and they kind of came back. But figure, there's no Arab country that's going to take them in. Their biggest supporter these days is, they don't have a ton of support like they used to among the Arab countries. They used to use them mercilessly as pawns. But now it's Qatar. Qatar is the big supporter of Hamas, and as you probably know about Qatar, it's about that big. And what it basically is 10% of the population are wealthy oil people. 90% of the population are essentially slaves. They are people that are shipped in from other parts of the world, sometimes through human trafficking, and sometimes through a quasi-legitimate form of human trafficking where they offer them jobs. Their passports are taken from them at the border, and then they are dressed in these clothes and put out in 115 and 120 degree heat in Qatar, where they're told to work like slaves. They live hundreds sharing a single bathroom. And the ones who make it back home to their original country are often done so in caskets. So this is great. The Arab country most supporting the Palestinians, especially Hamas these days, they're pretty much guilty of modern slavery. And again, the light of the Torah hasn't seemed to shine anywhere near them. So go back to, there's a part of me that says, oh, if only Qatar would take these Palestinians in, but it's not going to happen. So the question becomes, how can we disagree about these issues, even though we are very passionate about them? Or no? The problem is not made any better by the fact that we're growing up still in our relationship with Israel. It seemed so easy back in the early 20th century, even the mid and late 20th century, when my parents lived there and my brothers were born there, and earlier, when we had this like romance. We were kind of the ugly partner in this romance, but fortunately we had we were a little bit older, and we had some of us had some money in our pockets. And Israel was like this beautiful young newlywed that we were dating, strong, and every time I went to Israel, I just couldn't. Other people say I went to the Kotel and I kissed the stones and I felt the presence of God. Really, what I felt on my first trip was, oh my God, they're so damn beautiful. I was like Lynn felt the same way. I'm like, they're so attractive. It's like I never saw Jews who were like so tan and so strong and so smart, and every single one of them was just like, I love them, and they're Jewish, it filled me with a sense of hope and a sense of pride. But we've grown up in our relationship with Israel. They're not immune anymore. We're sort of in that relationship where we're kind of in our 40s or 50s. We're kind of a little bit of midlife crisis. We're never going to leave them. They're my dance partner. And frankly, I do think it's a marriage between American Jews and Israeli Jews. I have no hope in Europe. I have no hope in Europe at all. When people tell me, don't you realize there's this protest going on in Germany and the store was burned in France? I'm telling you, I took so many courses on the Holocaust. One thing I came out of it was I don't trust the Europeans to protect a single Jew. I haven't had any faith in the Europeans since the Dreyfus affair, for God's sake. Karl Marx predicted the Holocaust. He just said it was going to happen in England or France. There ain't no one coming from Europe. It's us. Do you know that in a recent Pew poll, the majority of Israelis said that American Jews have a right to have an opinion about Israel. That shocked me. I thought Israelis would think that we don't have a right to weigh in on these discussions, that our job is to support whatever we think we're supposed to be supporting. But actually, Israelis don't mind that, by and large, by majority. And yet, in this kind of midlife relationship, where we're not going anywhere, our younger people are still feeling less and less connected to Israel, I myself is, when I go there, I see the Orthodox taking over more and more. I see myself denied as a Jew. I see my family denied as a Jew. I was harassed at the Ministry of the Interior for a suspicion that I wasn't really Jewish, so they wouldn't give me the student visa to study at the conservative yeshiva. And I'm sitting there talking to this woman. I'm like, my name is Nadav Kane, and the passport's got Israel stamps all over from the other times I've lived in Israel. And she was like, well, it comes from the powers that be that I'm not supposed to stamp your passport. It doesn't make me feel too connected to the land of Israel, but it doesn't matter. You know what? I dance with them that brung me, and my commitment to Israel is forever. So this is where we're at. Standing together as reeds in a bunch, so that we cannot be broken in our support of Israel, has too often been interpreted in recent years as, you may only have my position, or else you are not part of the bundle. You are a threat to the bundle, and you are making us weaker. And I think that we have to go back to what the tradition is saying, which is two things. One, it's when we have the courage to debate without making it personal, when we understand that the other person is still a Jew, and when we trust, well, if they say so, that the person is honestly trying to achieve the future and security of the state of Israel, which is under threat, where no one else is going to help us except for fellow Jews. And that the debates about Israel's future are debates for the sake of heaven. And that when we listen to the other side, we will find the perspective we seek. And the second thing, which is why I gave this sermon on Rosh Hashanah. We can be wrong. We can be fallible. It's one of the gifts of the Jewish people, of our tradition, which is that we understand that we can have doubt, that we can be committed to something where we say, I could be wrong. I could be wrong. I could feel so passionately that this is the right future for Israel, or I'm doing the right thing by adopting this position, or voting a certain way, or not agreeing with Netanyahu on something, and I could be wrong. And the other side, which has been shaming me, could well be right. And it could be the other way around. That those who are trying so hard to solve the paradox of having a land and a democracy in the Jewish state, who see in having compassion for hundreds of children who are killed, and feel that this is not good, that this is certainly, the children who were killed in Gaza absolutely were killed as a result of Hamas. The world will never understand it, and I have no interest in trying to convince a Frenchman of that. Forget it. They never get it. They're looking, as the chief rabbi of France said, they're not looking to discuss Israeli policy. They're looking to hate Jews. So unless you understand that from the moment you start talking, you understand nothing. At the same time, when I look at another Jew who says, this killing of children is going to make their parents and families so crazy with blame of Israel that it's going to lead to future insecurity for our state and new legions of fighters. Don't know. It could be right and it could be wrong. So this is what I'm saying. Let's have a sandwich. Let's have a discussion. But every Reed who sincerely cares about the future of Israel, they could be right and we could be wrong, or we could be right and they could be wrong. But we're Reeds who have to be bundled together in that debate because no one else has our best interests at heart.